I've often thought that so much of our field, particularly recently, has been on the borderline of science fiction. And I think many of the ideas here at the conference have been very inspiring for science fiction writers. I only wish we had more professional science fiction writers here listening to some of the exciting papers. But let me share a little bit about this area. So this is an image of the guide that I was talking about a minute ago, a selection of science fiction stories with reasonable science. And there's the URL that will let you get to it. Now, I want to say from the beginning that this selection has a tremendous disadvantage. And that disadvantage is that it's all based on English stories available in English. And that's really too bad. And so if people have stories in other languages that I may not be aware of, please let me know. There you see my email, fraknoi@fhda.edu. Or if I've left out any of your favorite stories from the list, please send me an email or in some way get in touch with me on the web and let me know about things I haven't included. So as I said, the first serious book about SETI in the way that Frank Drake envisioned it was The Listeners. It's a series of short stories that were published in 1966 thereafter, and they were collected in a novelization called The Listeners. And as you can see on the cover of this edition, Carl Sagan thought it was one of the best fictional portrayals of contact, and he certainly paid attention to it when he wrote Contact a little bit later on. Another book to which a Caltech geochemist by the name of Harrison Brown made a major contribution was the Cassiopeia Affair, one that in particular looked at the political and social consequences of a message that is not only received but interpreted and distributed to the world. And I think many people who are in the world of looking at what happens after we get a message, the post-detection world, have also been thinking about how can we responsibly prepare the world for the implications of what we might learn from these kinds of messages, provided we can interpret them. Robert Sawyer is an amateur astronomer, but very well versed in science, and his 2006 short story Flashes in this collection is also about psychological and social consequences of a message, and he's written a number of books in which SETI factors into in a major way into the plot. David Brin, who has a PhD in space science, is one of the most knowledgeable scientists writing science fiction, and in this incredibly complicated and somewhat difficult novel called Existence, he imagines that the world has received an actual physical artifact which contains messages from conflicting civilizations. And in fact, many such artifacts are identified. And so a very complicated set of consequences results in that situation. A very interesting novel. Many of you know Carl Sagan's novel Contact, which was made into a film with Jodie Foster playing the role of Jill Tarter. And in many of these stories, like Contact, scientists are sent instructions for building or doing something. And it's remarkable how quickly they follow those instructions. I would hope that we would give a little more thought to following extraterrestrial instructions until we understood the consequences of it. Another of those is another astronomer, Fred Hoyle, who wrote a BBC script and later adopted it into a novel called A for Andromeda with John Elliott. And in it, we build a being rather than a machine. Lately, there have been many collections of science fiction by scientists. This one edited for Springer by astronomer Michael Brotherton. I was very fortunate to be one of the contributors to that, and there are a number of SETI stories in this book. And as I mentioned, I've been writing science fiction stories with a SETI bent for a few years. One of the ones that was published in 2019 in Sci-Fi Journal is called The Unwelcome Reply, in which, after much work, we interpret a SETI message, and it basically goes, your message is important to us. Unfortunately, we have hundreds of messages in the queue ahead of you, and we will try to get to your message as soon as possible, but please be patient. Another short story I wrote was actually one of the first that I wrote, but just is being published in a couple of weeks in the Worlds Within magazine, takes Carl Sagan's question as its title, Who Speaks for Earth? And it's about a message that is received, which then leads to the formation of a very, very well-funded religion, which believes that even before there are consultations about whether we answer, this religion needs to answer. And they buy an unused radio antenna in the United States and propose to send an answer without consulting anyone. And then the president of the United States is confronted with the decision, do we bomb or in other ways destroy that radio telescope before the message goes out, because we're not ready to reveal the location of the Earth, and why should this group take the responsibility for such a decision all upon itself? So that's worked out a little bit in this short story, Who Speaks for Earth? Another story called The Lurker comes from a suggestion by James Benford and others, that there might be artifacts, complete artifacts, not the small fragments that we talked about at this meeting, but complete artifacts lurking in the asteroid belt. And in my story, a hapless pair of asteroid explorers comes across such an artifact, which they unfortunately and involuntarily wake up, and the consequences of that. And now finally, I'll just ask the question, which I don't think we've asked too many times in the SETI community. Could it be that we get too many SETI messages? And two scientists have written science fiction about that. Gregory Benford, who's a physicist, a retired physicist at the University of California in Irvine, has written a number of stories, and they've been adapted into a novel called Shadows of Eternity, in which we get so many messages from a diverse variety of civilizations, that we build a SETI library on the moon just to handle the incoming traffic and the interpretation. And then Alastair Reynolds, who is a PhD astrophysicist, worked for a long time for the European Space Agency, now a full-time science fiction writer, has written a short story called Feeling Rejected in the shape of a referee's report for a paper. And this paper simply reports another extraterrestrial civilization and another message. And the referee says, well, I'm so sorry, but we've had so many papers reporting individual messages in individual civilizations. This just isn't news anymore. If you find a new category of messages or civilizations, maybe nature should consider that. But certainly just finding one more message is not something you're going to write a paper about. And what a notion. May we have that problem sometime in the future. What a world it would be if that were our problem. So this is just a very short introduction to some science fiction ideas, and I hope that we can now have a discussion, an open discussion about your favorites and your ideas. All right, I'll stop there. And I don't know, there are messages coming in. Let's see. So, oh wow, a lot of messages coming in. So, let's see. E pluribus. Yes, well, E pluribus starts with a first episode that has a remarkably accurate depiction of the SETI enterprise. Then it goes nuts, in my opinion, and that's completely a different idea. But that first episode is well worth watching if you are a SETI practitioner or a SETI fan, because they took some trouble to show you the sort of message receipt that might actually happen in one of our projects. Wow. So there's just Graham and Jacob, maybe you can help a little bit with going through all these messages because there's now a lot. But let's see.
I can give a quick synopsis. We've been kind of like, as you've been speaking, Andrew, about all these incredible things, we've been talking to about Pluribus, the television show, Three Body Problem, Liu Cixin's novel, which is part of a trilogy series, which I'm going to start reading next month. We've been discussing the Andromeda Strain. Interstellar was brought up, and concepts of like, the trade-offs of science versus making things presentable for an audience. And so there's been some fun things in the chat here, but I think we were mostly discussing Pluribus so far. What a fun show.
That's great. Well, I know that the Three Body Problem has been a very controversial novel in science circles because in one sense it's a lovely depiction, and the first novel particularly describes the Maoist purge in China in such a sensitive and wonderfully written way. I recommend it just for that. But once he gets to the science, astronomers in the audience, please back me up, but the science is not that great. You have to kind of swallow some things, and then you have to believe in particles that are alive in some way and carry consciousness and all kinds of other things that are way beyond the realm of what I am willing to suspend disbelief for. But many people find that the way in which he then works out the dark forest hypothesis in the second novel, the warning that we should not be quick to answer things because there might be hostile players out there. And as so many early SETI people warned, we humans have just had the ability to do SETI for 60 years or so. So we are by definition the youngest and dumbest civilization in the entire galaxy doing this. And maybe like a baby, probably shouldn't have a discussion about astrophysics at the next party. So we should be quiet until we're a little older and learn some things, and that there might be hostile forces out there that we need to learn more about. And so that dark forest hypothesis is what he explores in the second novel. So controversial but interesting set of books. And let me say that if people want to talk, what you can do is you can go to the React button, either at the bottom or top of your screen. And one of the options there is to raise your hand. And if you then raise your hand, you are catapulted to the front of my screen, and I can see that you want to say something aloud or be part of the discussion. And so that would be a nice way for people to start to participate. So we want to hear other voices besides mine. So I hope people will raise their hand and join the discussion, suggest some favorites or some things that have really annoyed them. Somebody brought up Olaf Stapledon's The Star Maker, one of the classic old science fiction stories, long before the modern scientific approach to SETI. He has a whole history of the universe. Let's see. Jacob mentions Ted Chiang. Ted Chiang is a wonderful short story writer, and he wrote a story called The Story of Your Life, which is a very, very complex story. And the movie Arrival is an adaptation. It's not an entirely full adaptation of that because there are many levels to that story. But Arrival, I thought, was a wonderful movie to show the complexity that we will run into trying to interpret messages from other minds and other civilizations. So that's definitely on my recommend list. Anyone want to start joining in? Telling us something you've loved or you haven't, or challenging us?
I think Stephen Aldersley has his hand up.
Okay.
In
the absence of any other hands going up, I put mine up. So I've been struck by, listening to the talks this week, by the universal optimism that people have displayed. And I'm afraid I don't share that. And so I think I've put in a word in for the opposite sense, that I'm not sure that we're going to make it till 2040, for example, and people talking about the habitable worlds thing. If we get that far, I won't be here, but if I was here, I'd be surprised. So anyway, I've written a rather large novel, or three shorter novels that do touch on SETI in the end. I'm not an astronomer, so I had to do a lot of reading to make it realistic, I guess.
Are you trying to get those published?
I intend to, yes.
Good.
These are the first novels I've written, and I'm finding the editing process to be difficult. You have to go through 2 or 3 times before you can start to think, well, maybe this is tight enough that people will read it. As I send it out to friends, and I get a lot of feedback. So I'm not quite there yet. But in any case, I did want to throw in that alternative view that I'm not sure where everybody gets their optimism from. I'll stop there.
Your pessimism is not about SETI per se, but about the world surviving long enough to do SETI. Is that
right? So my there's a lot of themes in the stories, but one of them is the history of Homo sapiens and the future of Homo sapiens, and I think we're not going in a good direction. I've listened to that's the lens that I've been listening to people through. And I see that Catherine's got her hand up, so why don't you take over, Catherine?
Oh, I'm not going to take over, just going to keep you company in that. I'm also not unduly optimistic, but I'll tell you one thing that gives me a little bit of comfort is the recognition that in humanity's long history, collapses are rarely complete. So there's usually enough of somebody somewhere to rebuild and make things go again.
Hope so.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're facing different kinds of existential crises than our species has ever faced before. And this week is not looking all that cheerful. But yeah, I think I'll just let that kind of statement stand, just that there's...
But let me ask you, you put something, and this is probably a senior moment, but you mentioned the Parrots of Arecibo, and can you remind me what story that's in?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm trying to remember what it's called. I'll see if I can find it and pop a link into the chat. So it's this beautiful story, and it's written from the perspective. So it's Ted Chiang, again, who, as we know, is like a genius, and I just love his writing so much. He also did a wonderful one called Exhalation, which was written from the perspective of a synthetic, life form. But the Parrots of Arecibo, it was called The Great Silence. And it was written from the perspective of the endangered parrots of Arecibo, who were basically kind of, there's just one, and he's kind of reflecting on the astronomers who are using this telescope to search for others elsewhere. And the parrots are right there, and they're intelligent and they're communicative. And yet he manages to make it sweet instead of, I mean, obviously there's an implicit judgment there, as there damn well should be. But he manages to make it touching rather than whacking you over the head with what we've done to the other species on this planet. It's an incredibly forgiving. story.
Ted Chiang
Yeah.
story?
It's,
Oh,
yeah, it's
great.
Ted Chiang.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll find it. I'll pop it in the link. I'll be right back.
I'll add that to my list. That's
Oh,
excellent.
it's really moving,
Good.
really moving.
All right, Edwin Turner, you're next. Thank you. Mr. Turner, would you turn on your microphone?
There we go.
Oh, great.
There. Okay. Just a couple of things very quickly. One was the question of why a lot of scientists, I think, have not been that happy with the three-body problem novel and trilogy. As you mentioned, it's not very accurate on the science, but a lot of science fiction has that deficit, of course, and that's, if it makes a good story, that's not a serious problem. But I think what's particularly irritated me, at least, and I shouldn't try to speak for others, about the first book, if I stopped after that, was that it's not just that he assumes, some hand wavy faster than light travel or, that sort of thing, that a lot of science fiction is almost like fantasy where they use magic. It might as well be called magic but in the three-body problem, the author explains things very carefully and sort of as though he's, giving a physics lesson or something. It's like to try to make the readers understand something about the three-body problem or something, the extra dimensions and so on. He sort of dresses it in the aura of, almost like he's writing a popular science book, but it's wrong. And that seems kind of worse than just assuming something that, doesn't conserve energy or whatever, the kind of things that Neil Tyson likes to make lists of in movies. And to start off with, the three-body problem is not about a three-body system. It's about a four-body system, 3 stars and a planet. And it's not that the planet doesn't matter. In fact, that's the whole point of chaotic systems. The tiniest difference makes a big, difference to the consequences. So I think that may be why, despite it being an engaging and certainly imaginative story, it sort of carefully misinforms readers, and I think that's objectionable. And the only other comment I was going to make quickly about pessimism is I used to have the privilege of drinking beers when I was a graduate student, of having beers with Richard Feynman, on Friday afternoons at the Athenaeum, the Caltech faculty club.
Company.
And one of his aphorisms that have always stuck with me is that you should, for a science, he was talking about science. I actually think it has broader applications. He said you should always be least willing to believe what you most want to believe. This was to try to correct the very human bias, or confirmation bias. And in my opinion, astrobiologists ignore this wise advice more than any other field of science that I could name.
Yeah, but we'll let the astrobiologists answer you. But I do hear you about the crucial mistake, very similar to Andy Weir and The Martian, where the whole plot of The Martian depends on wind on Mars being strong enough to blow over and destroy the spacecraft, which was going to take him home. And so he wrote very honestly about the fact that he knew that the winds on Mars were not strong enough to do that, but without that he wouldn't have had a plot. So he kind of went with it. But
I
equally
like
annoying to
much
people
better.
who want good science. Yeah, but thank you for the comment. Other people want to. Jill Tardy put a comment in. Jill, you said, I find the decision she has to make about telling the world really interesting, but I'm not sure which story or movie you're referring to. So can you give us a little more information? Love to hear from you. Jill is one of those people who has a direct connection to science fiction. She always tells us that the character that Jodie Foster played, or the character of Ellie Arroway in Contact, was based on her. It's not her, but it was based on her. But we at the SETI Institute were very impressed when Jodie Foster came to the Institute to study with Jill on how to be that character in the movie Contact. That was really a nice sequence of events. Let's see. In the meantime, Catherine has put the Great Silence story into the chat. That's great. And I see there's been a discussion of District 9, which I have not seen, but which is very, very popular. Maybe it's something I need to see. Oh, that was the three-body problem, Jill says. Okay. She was talking about the three-body problem. And Benjamin Fields tells us that he doesn't find the dark forest theory even remotely plausible as a solution to the Fermi paradox. And here he is. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think it makes for a great story because, stories come from conflict. And so to have a completely hostile vision of the universe where everyone's at conflict is like perfect from that sense. But as an actual plausible view of like galactic sociology, I think it's kind of absurd because, first off, you can't. The whole concept of the dark force theory is assuming that every civilization is going to like be hostile by default based on game theory, and I don't think beings actually behave perfectly rationally. So I think that to assume that every society in the universe is going to follow the most game theory approach to how they conduct themselves, I think is it ignores, that there be differences in culture and individual differences as well. And I think I also question, like, as soon as a civilization becomes a threat to another civilization, it also becomes detectable. So it's kind of the logic behind the dark forest I find kind of self-defeating. So, and then also just being in SETI, I guess I'm biased against it because I don't want to believe that, what I'm doing is going to lead to the downfall of humanity. So I like to be optimistic about aliens, but that's more my own psychology than anything else.
No. And there are lots of people who are very worried about this, who take the more pessimistic view that until we know what's out there, let's just be careful. But this is a debate we've actually had on the board at the SETI Institute. We had a proposal to send a message, and we had to vote on whether we wanted to be part of sending such a message, and the board voted no. There may have been one of the few votes ever taken on this question of revealing ourselves. But Jill is putting more interesting things in the chat about whether or not we could keep the receipt of a message secret, and this is also a fascinating question. All those people who have conspiracy theories about the government hiding messages in spacecraft. Many scientists like to point out that scientists are among the worst people for keeping secrets, and that there might be a really difficult time, particularly with the media now being so on top of things, of keeping any serious discovery secret. I think that's also a subject for great science fiction, of should we keep a message secret, and will we be able to do it? Even if there's a small group which is analyzing the message to which the information is confined, is it possible that no one in that group will want to impress their loved one back home by telling them that they were in on the first message and that the word will get out? I don't know, human nature being what it is. And Jill wonders if we can shape the message, not their message, but how the information gets out, and whether we'll be able to do that. Now, Stephen, are you just keeping your hand up because you had it before? Do you want to say something?
No. I was going to step in as long as nobody else is talking.
You're next.
All right. So like I say, SETI comes into my story, and it comes in towards the end with a hunch that that one of the main characters has, that she's at the Allen Array. She's visiting, and she has a hunch. She goes out to in the dishes, among the dishes, and she has a hunch that the star in the constellation of Leo, Rasselas, is harboring an exoplanet with an extraterrestrial civilization. I guess Rasselas does have an exoplanet, which is a large Jupiter, but this would be a different one. And so she goes back into the site and persuades the engineers to point the dishes at Rasselas. And sure enough, the hunch pays off, and indeed, there is a message. It's not well described in the story, but there's definitely a message, and they put it through all their various tests to make sure that on the belief that which I assume is real, that you should try and disprove it with every method you can. Before you decide that, maybe it is a real message. And it turns out that it is a real message. And so this is probably the only time I'm going to get to talk to SETI people. So if you're looking for somewhere to look at Rasselas.
All right.
And if you find something there, then I will be pleased, and you should tell me.
All right. Well, I will. About what you said previously, I will tell you that the best thing I did before I started seriously distributing my science fiction was to join a writers group. And in this writers group, some people are writing novels like you are, and they send a chapter at a time, and others send a story, and we discuss each other's story. Now, I was very fortunate because Isaac Asimov's niece is a member of my writers group, so it's a very nice group. But a group like that can be helpful, and also there are professional editors who are in the business of editing novels, and some of my colleagues who have written novels swear by that if you spend the money on a professional editor, the kind of changes that person will make and suggest will make a tremendous difference in the publishability of that. So you might want to look at Writer's Market or some other of the resources to see if you can find an editor who deals with the kind of books you're writing. Just a thought. Now, Catherine, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something more?
I totally forget.
Oh, okay. Sorry. That's fine. Graham says there are also some fun stories out there where we interact with or find aliens for whom we can't understand what they are. And those are so often intriguing, from Solaris to Altered Carbon to The Expanse and more. Yeah. That's it. The Expanse is also a very interesting. I mean, that series of novels is all about planetary exploration, the stages planetary exploration goes through in the history of human civilization. So even more than the television version, the novels have some, serious science and science history in them. So I've enjoyed some of those. And Jill Tarter asked, "Do professional editors ever try to change your story?" Yes, I'm in the midst of a big discussion with the editor of Jim Gunn's Ad Astra magazine. When Jim Gunn died, in his name, they continued publishing a science fiction magazine called Ad Astra. And I've sent a science fiction SETI story to them, and this editor has asked me to rewrite it 7 times. And the last 2 times she's asked me to change the plot in a significant way. And I've been grappling with that. So it can be that they suggest that you don't have enough of a plot or you don't have a good enough plot, and they will suggest such changes. Graham, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I had to bring up The Expanse. I love The Expanse stories. Not so much because of aliens. There is like the alien technology with this black goop, and eventually in the novels they kind of get more into explaining what that all means. Of course, the Amazon show ends before they make a big jump in time in the stories, but it's worth a read. I still actually have to finish the last book in the series. I've only read the first 8. But I did meet Daniel and Ty some years ago at Santa Fe Institute. We had this interplanetary festival down there, and myself, I was there. Matt Kaplan was there. A bunch of us came down, and we had a chance to watch the movie Alien with Daniel and Ty, and they talked first a little bit about how Alien was part of their original inspiration for The Expanse, because they loved this story of like kind of like the blue collar workers on board this mining freighter are the ones who end up dealing with this alien scenario. And even to this day, like the Alien film itself still stands up so well. And like the idea of like implantation, of this creature. Of course, the organic acid melting through the ship is a little silly, but there's so many ideas of like the biology is incredible. Alan Dean Foster, if any of you know of his work, great sci-fi writer, but really great of novelization of stories. He read the novelization of Star Wars that came out before the original first movie of Star Wars came out. He wrote the novelization of Alien as well, and it's a really good read. So I recommend that. And I think for me, like I think for me, Alien, like horror sci-fi kind of really got me into sci-fi as a young person. So not only are we closing in here soon on a century since we had Star Maker from Olaf Stapledon, and a lot of these advancing ideas in sci-fi, but we're almost a century out since the original version of The Thing. So in 1938, John Campbell published a short story called Who Goes There, which was the basis for the 1952 film The Thing from Another World. And then, of course, famously, the 1984 film, The Thing, the 2011 prequel film, The Thing, just fantastic, like alien horror sci-fi that for some people might be a little terrifying, but I always just found it super fascinating, and I love those stories so much.
As long as you're going back in time, I should relate that at one of our sessions, there was a mention of Jack London's story, The Red One, which I had never heard of, but apparently involves an alien artifact. And I found that it is available free on the web, so I'll put that in the chat. I haven't read it yet because I've been attending this conference, but it looks like that's something that any of us can read. And it's a Jack London story about an alien artifact and people who worship it. So fascinating. That's, I think, from 1919, he said. All right. Other thoughts, suggestions? Oh, yes. Ringworld. Well, then there's Larry Niven. Larry Niven calls himself a UCLA math dropout, but he is the science fiction writer who has really absorbed a lot of ideas from astronomy and from some of the more speculative areas of astronomy. And he has a whole series of stories and novels which are summarized under the phrase Tales of Known Space. And if you're a hard science fiction, a scientifically oriented science fiction writer, Larry Niven is certainly someone whose work you might enjoy reading. And Ringworld is one of those Tales of Known Space stories, which is a Dyson ring. And there's actually been debate in the scientific literature about whether the Dyson ring he envisions in Ringworld is a stable one or not. He's actually engaged in some of that debate. So that's a fun story you can follow on if you Google it. Let's see. Salma Sali talks about Octavia Butler, after whom I think a station on Mars was recently named, if I have it correctly. And she's written a number of novels that involve contact, that involve some sensitive portrayals of dealing with the alien. So yeah, that's another author she's included in my longer list of science fiction authors who deal with good science. Absolutely. Are there any comments that I've left out? Oh, Jill Tarter mentions Mode in God's Eye, which was Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. That's and she asks, are there others that imagine living at a different time scale? Well, Robert Forward wrote a series of stories about living near a neutron star and therefore living in a different relativistic pace of time. Robert Forward, I think, was an engineer at JPL, but also a often published science fiction writer. And I think if you go scroll up, yes, Gordon put the link to my complete list of science fiction with good astronomy up on the link at 7:18 p.m. under BMSys administrator. So if you want to go, you can go to that link and find the entire, I think it's many pages of science fiction that I've at least read that has good science in it on a variety of topics. And Mark mentions Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur Clarke. Yes, another story that takes a lot of science into consideration. So what is Denis Villeneuve directing? There's a lot of directions in the chat. Benjamin, tell us what movie.
Yeah, he's doing the Rendezvous with Rama movie. Perfect.
Okay, great. Benjamin also mentions Childhood's End, an early science fiction novel by Arthur Clarke. And one of the things that I talk about in my bibliography is the Arthur Clarke story, The Sentinel, which was a basis, but not the basis for 2001, the movie. So again, that's now available free on the web, and I give the link to it. So if you want to read the original story that Arthur Clarke wrote many years before 2001, that's now available on the web. That's the nice thing, that as the years go on, many more stories are becoming available free on the web, so you can recommend them to students and use them in your classes or just tell friends about them. And whenever I learn about one, I include it in the list. Great. So Graham gives us the IMDb listing for Ringworld. Great. Our pooled knowledge is good. Any other thoughts, questions? We're coming up to the end.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind jumping in just for a moment, Andrew.
All right, just 1 second. Let me just mention that Kate Genevieve says she enjoys graphic novels by Jean Giraud, Mobius, Alan Moore, The Swamp Thing. And so there are a number of graphic novels which I am sadly not including in my list, but I would love to know more about graphic novels that have really good science or SETI in them. So that's a whole nother area, graphic novels. But go ahead, Graham. I interrupted you. Please go ahead.
So I thought about it, since I did mention John Campbell earlier, and I think it's now pretty well known in the sci-fi realm that even though he was the editor who brought forward people like Asimov and Clarke and Heinlein, it's pretty well known he also rejected a lot of women and people of color And I think, like we should also, earlier you mentioned how like your list of sci-fi that has SETI and techno signatures in it is really, it highlights the English speaking world, and how you'd love to have some people, other languages, the stories that are out there. And I think we are moving into a time now where it's time to have the human story shared of what sci-fi can be. And there's so many incredible ideas out there. And certainly in the history of sci-fi, there are some people who maybe they thought they were doing a good thing, but they maybe held some people back who we would have loved to have heard their voices long ago. Who knows what the golden age of sci-fi really could have been with some different perspectives. But I think it's important that we are moving into this era now where we are hearing from a lot more people, and you have these different visions now of the future, like Afrofuturism. You have transgender writing that's just become incredible, and like a lot of different people now are sharing these sci-fi stories that sometimes they're telling alien stories, but they're still telling very human stories in the process, and I think that's really crucial for where we are.
Octavia Butler being a good example of that. Yeah, absolutely. And I read something called Locus Magazine, which is the sort of the business magazine of science fiction. And it's remarkable how it's changed in the years that I've read it, and how many more of the authors featured are now people of color, are women, as you say, people from different cultures. And it's not just the Eurocentric view of things. So that is an encouraging trend. Indeed, Catherine's left, but one of the things that Catherine has been very helpful with at the SETI Institute is encouraging us to do more on post-detection studies. And we've started a whole new section on post-detection. And one of the things that we're thinking about, though we haven't done anything yet, but is that if we do have, before the message is found, some discussions about what we do after the message is found, those should be international discussions, just like this symposium is an international discussion. Any discussions about post-detection should involve many cultures and many perspectives, and we should give the world a chance to weigh in, not at the last minute, but as we are building up our technology to find messages. And I'd certainly like to see that happen, to have international discussions happening. Other thoughts, questions? Jill asks the important question, how do we find that world beyond those we know? Well, I think in some ways it means doing exactly what we're doing at this conference, which is making contact with colleagues in other countries and other cultures and asking them who to involve. I think it would be really good, for example, to bring together leaders of the world's religions and have a discussion of what it means for them if we make contact. What would be their reaction? And if they haven't thought about it, give them a chance to think about it, to have some introductory talks by scientists, but then to give an equal perspective to their view and their reactions. And to have, I would love to see workshops for educators in many different countries and cultures, where those workshops deal with post-detection issues. They introduce astrobiology and SETI to new audiences, and they get the audience input, which is then shared with some central library. I think that would be a very worthwhile project for the future. All right. Well, we're coming up on the scheduled closing time. This has been a very nice discussion. Thank you, those of you who stayed up or got up for it. Jacob, Graham, what would you like to do? Should we bring things slowly to a close?
Yeah, whenever you're ready. This has been phenomenal. It's so much fun.
Great. Well, if there aren't any last thoughts, I will say thank you to everyone who participated, and let's hope we get a good night's sleep before the next sessions.